This is the introduction to a series of talks on the individual psychology clinical formulation. It is for Adler Graduate School course number 511. There are 4 more talks during this course that focus on specific portions of a clinical formulation based on the individual psychology of Alfred Adler. The special project for this course is to write an individual psychology clinical formulation based on the main character in the film Ordinary People. It should be noted that some theories and some authors refer to a case conceptualization, while others refer to a case formulation. As near as I can tell, these are identical, and so for this course we will use the term formulation. The diagnostic formulation and the clinical formulation are the 2 parts of a comprehensive case formulation. This whole thing may also be referred to as an integrated case formulation or a biopsychosocial formulation. A comprehensive case formulation is typically written after the first session or 2 and is included in the treatment record as a part of the intake report. The clinical formulation evolves over the course of treatment as the therapist understands the client better. The diagnostic formulation is descriptive, and this means the focus is primarily on symptoms and on current functioning. Oftentimes, several symptoms occur together. Actually, that is what a diagnosis is, a cluster of symptoms that have occurred together during a specified period of time. The diagnostic inquiry is interested in what the client is experiencing and how they make sense of what they are experiencing. The time frame for a diagnostic formulation is the present. If we think of a person's life as a river of events and experience, the diagnostic inquiry is interested in narrow sections of the river. However, a good clinician never forgets the wisdom of Heraclitus, who said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." I hasten to add that the same is true for women. The clinical formulation is driven by the personality theory of the clinician, which, for this course, is the individual psychology of Alfred Adler. The clinical formulation uses all of the available information about the client to form hypotheses about the causes and the origins of their symptoms and their distress. It is usually focused on a more longitudinal view of the client's style of living, the whole river, if we want to continue the image. In their 2008 article, Kukin, Podesky, and Dudley identified 10 functions of comprehensive case formulations, which they define as a process in which therapist and client work collaboratively to first describe and then explain the issues a client presents in therapy. Its primary function is to guide therapy in order to relieve client distress and build client resilience. The case formulation is a synthesis of theory, research, and the client's experience, an application of what we know about human functioning to the person who is seeking help. It can be validating of the client's experience and normalize their distress. In this way, it promotes client engagement in the therapeutic process and enhances the therapeutic alliance. A good case formulation makes numerous complex problems more manageable and guides the selection, focus, and sequence of interventions. It identifies client strengths and suggests a way of building client resilience. It suggests the simplest and most cost-effective interventions. The case formulation can anticipate and address potential problems that could arise in the therapy. If the client is not making progress in therapy, the case formulation can be re-examined and may suggest alternative routes for change. Finally, the case formulation is one of the primary tools in clinical supervision. The diagnostic formulation describes and categorizes the symptoms a person is experiencing at the time of the interview. The focus is on the frequency, intensity, duration, and impact of their symptoms, with the goal of identifying the appropriate diagnosis or diagnoses from DSM-5. This is covered in a different course. The clinical formulation is focused on the person's complaints instead of their symptoms. For example, a person may have the symptoms needed for a diagnosis of persistent depressive disorder in DSM-5, but their primary complaint could be their inability to work effectively, or difficulties with intimacy, or low energy and fatigue. The core of human distress in individual psychology is a poor preparation for the tasks of life, namely society, occupation, and love. What Adler called, quote, how well an individual is prepared to make contact with his fellow human beings. End quote. This poor preparation, often activated or intensified by a life event, the exogenous factor, leads to feelings of inadequacy, threat, and fear. Over time, these feelings, and the person's compensations for these feelings, leads to continued difficulties in completing the tasks of life. Individual psychology refers to personality as the style of life, or the unique law of movement. In the clinical formulation, the clinician reports the hypothesized basic convictions that seem to guide the client's unique style of moving through the world. The next 4 talks in this series will go into more detail about all of these components of the clinical formulation. The individual psychology clinician has a variety of sources of information to choose from in generating the clinical formulation. In addition to a clinical interview, we typically collect and interpret early recollections and conduct a family constellation semi-structured interview. There is also a semi-structured interview and a Q-sort interview available to identify the personality priorities. The Basis A is the most widely used individual psychology standardized assessment instrument, but there is also an assessment instrument for personality priorities.